Hello, I'd like to talk about ChatGPT and retracted journal articles. And particularly I'm going to talk about the question, does ChatGPT believe the claims in retracted academic journal articles? So the reason why this is interesting to me anyway, and I think is a useful topic to investigate, is that large language models like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Gemini seem to be replacing search engines or complementing search engines for information seeking. So whereas a few years ago you might normally Google something or search for it with Bing or another major search engine, nowadays I think it's increasingly common to use a large language model instead. So these serve as a kind of a replacement for search engines for many purposes. So particularly for information. So if I do it myself, I use large language models to try and summarize information for me and to find resources on the web. So I think this is increasingly common. So the issue here is that if you rely on a summary from ChatGPT rather than reading the original source, then you might get misleading information. And from the perspective of retractions, we were particularly worried that large language models might report evidence that was from retracted articles, so would be giving you misleading science. So whereas if you visited the page of a retracted article, you would see it has a retraction notice on, but if you rely on the information in a large language model instead of visiting the host page, and the large language model doesn't know that it's retracted or doesn't tell you that it's retracted, then we have a problem. We have a problem of misleading information. So because of this, we designed two studies to assess if retracted information can be used by large language models. So these are two kind of experiments with large language models and retracted articles. So I'll go through them one at a time. For the first study, we wanted to know, does ChatGPT know that articles are retracted? So we wanted to specifically ask it about articles and see if it reported that they had been retracted. So for this, we identified 217 articles that had been retracted or otherwise had major concerns about them, and these articles we selected to have high social media attention. So they weren't run-of-the-mill retractions that nobody really, or most people don't care too much about, but they were high-profile retractions that got a lot of attention. And because of the way that large language models work, things with a lot of attention that get a lot of discussion, they should be more aware of, or it should be more information about them should be more deeply embedded in their knowledge, because they'll have seen the information multiple times. So this is kind of a best case for a large language model, or the easiest case to ask it about high-profile retracted articles. So why specifically 217? Well, we started with 250, but then we had to filter out some of them. And we asked ChatGPT 4o Mini to evaluate the quality of the research. So we didn't ask it if it knew that they were retracted directly, because if you suspected that an article was retracted, you'd probably go to its home page to check. You probably wouldn't ask a large language model, but we asked it a question that relates to its retraction status, and the question was to evaluate the quality of the article. And for each of the 217 articles, we asked ChatGPT 30 times for each article to evaluate the quality of that article. So if it knew it was that an article was retracted, it should have given it a low score because of the retraction. And we used the API interface for this instead of the web interface, because for this interface it won't try to search the web to get relevant information, but it will rely on its internal knowledge. So this study is designed to see if there is internal knowledge that gets used in ChatGPT 4o Mini specifically about high-profile retracted articles that it will use in a response to a question about the quality of those articles. So it's kind of an indirect study, but to trying to discover if ChatGPT knows about these retractions. So this is a tiny little report. This is the full report on one of the papers. So 217 papers, 30 times each. So there were loads of reports, and this is one of them. So after being asked to evaluate the quality of a paper on a 4-point scale, 4 is the maximum. So this is we've got the top score. You can see the report. It reports on the originality, significance, and rigour of the paper. These are the 3 major components of research quality. And then in the conclusion, it gives it a top rating of 4-star, despite the fact that it was retracted, which it doesn't mention. And it just says very positive things about the paper. So it really either has no idea that the paper's been retracted, or it doesn't use that information to inform the quality evaluation. So a human reviewer would certainly use the information that an article was retracted to give it a score, and will probably give it the lowest score because it's been retracted, or at least a low score. So of the 6,510 reports about the 217 high-profile, retracted or concerning academic studies, none of these reports, none of the ChatGPT reports mentioned that the article had been retracted or had any relevant errors. So there was no information in any of the reports to suggest that these articles were problematic. And for 190 of the articles, ChatGPT gave them a relatively high score, so it was impressed by them despite them being retracted articles. 27 were given low scores, but these usually were by claiming a weak study rather than any specific problem. So just overall a weak study, although 5 were criticised as being controversial because of the topic really more than the article. So nothing in any of the reports suggested that ChatGPT was aware of the specific problems with the retracted high-profile articles. So this was not really a good result for ChatGPT. It suggests that retraction information is not embedded in the knowledge base of the large language model. So we looked at a follow-on for this, a second study. So for the second study, we took 61 specific claims from these articles. So some of the articles didn't have a specific unique claim, but for 61 of the articles, we could find a claim that was in the article that the retraction would, as far as we knew, render no longer true or no longer supported by evidence. So we thought, we'll submit these claims to ChatGPT and ask it if the claims were true or false. So if it knows about the retraction, then it should say they're either false or they're not supported by evidence. And if it doesn't know about the paper itself, it shouldn't say that they're true because it doesn't have the evidence. So it would only give a claim that the article is true if it knows about the paper either from before it was retracted or after it's retracted, but without awareness of the retraction notice. And these claims came from before the cut-off date for ChatGPT's knowledge for this, so it should have known about the retractions for this research, although the specific data it was fed with we don't know, and it might have included some data from before the retraction was published in specific cases, so we don't know for sure that it has seen a retraction notice for any of these articles, but it's plausible that it could have done for nearly all of them. So we asked ChatGPT again for O-Mini via its API, which doesn't do web checks, whether the statements were true, the 61 statements were true. And this is an example. So a cosmic airburst event occurred over the Ohio River Valley during the late Holocene. This is one of the statements. So we asked it 10 times if this is true. And then we looked at the claims and we manually classified the ChatGPT responses according to the extent to which it thought the statements were true. So it didn't usually say true or false, but it gave a kind of discussion around whether it thought they were true or false. So this is an example of a good response from ChatGPT. It says, at the end, without specific and verifiable evidence or studies directly documenting such an event, the statement cannot be confirmed as true. So it appears to be misleading or lacking in substantiation based on current knowledge. So that's accurate. So no problem at all with that. Okay, so we summarised the extent to which it agreed or disagreed with the statements in all these reports, and we found that it usually either said that the statements were true or gave a positive response about them. So it didn't say they were definitely true, but gave implied that they were more likely to be true than not. So this is the table. It's a little bit of a convoluted table. So we've combined all the phrases that ChatGPT uses from the top, which is the statement is true, or can be considered to be true, or is likely to be true, or appears to be true, or accurate. So this was almost half of the time it gave a strongly positive statement about the claim. And then the further you go down in the table, the more towards false you get, but only 1.1% said that the statement was false. So it would be fair enough for it to say the statement's false or the statement's not supported by evidence, but it shouldn't be saying that it's true or consistent with the evidence. So most of the time it's too positive in a sense of tending to support the statement being true or stating that it's true, even though it's the only evidence for the statement is retracted research, so it should be saying that. Okay, so in summary, the two studies we did suggested that ChatGPT doesn't recognise that articles have been retracted, even after they've had extensive social media coverage. So even high-profile cases of retracted articles, ChatGPT doesn't have the knowledge that the article was retracted, or if it does have the knowledge, it doesn't act on it when asked to evaluate the quality of the paper or the validity of claims in the paper. So, for example, in the second case, it frequently stated or suggested that facts in retracted articles were true. So it does emphasise that if you do rely on large language models for your facts, if you're a journalist, it could be a time saver, but you do need to check for retractions on the journal's website, because even if ChatGPT says that something is true and gives you a citation for the evidence, it might be a citation to a retracted article. So then you would be unwise to rely on that evidence. So it's another reason to check your sources, the primary sources for journalists covering science journalists. So for large language models owners, we would suggest that they try to make them more aware of retractions, so that they have procedures embedded to sensitize them to research that's been retracted, so they don't report it as true. Okay, I hope you found that interesting, and thank you very much for listening.